aspect that unfortunately our victims and survivors can't get out of.
I'm going to keep playing devil's advocate here and say, well, where does the trafficking come in? I hear trafficking, it sounds like somebody's being moved from one place to another, but these people sound like maybe indentured servants, but I don't necessarily see the trafficking, quote unquote, part of it. Where does that play in?
So for the moving part, and you can add on from the international aspect, we have a really major highway that runs through Reno, and that's I-80. And it connects from San Francisco to New York, New Jersey, and stops in Chicago and all over a lot of major metropolitan areas throughout the United States. And then Ron can add on to it with the international aspect. If you look at hotbeds of where human trafficking is, it's near bodies of water, right? But this is a supply and demand business, right? There's a supply for it. There's a demand for it. We need to find a supply. So with having that major highway, there's a reason why it's big here in Reno, Nevada, because it's a great place to set up shop, right? It's a 24-hour lifestyle. Nevada's got a lot of vices, right? There's a lot of vulnerable people out here that can be easily become victims of sex and labor trafficking.
So it's not people in shipping crates like we're used to, although I'm guessing that probably happens as well, right? But that's what I think the public impression is you got a kid grabbed, from the scruff of the neck, snatched off the street, thrown into a shipping crate, and sent overseas. And that's actually not the typical setup, from what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly is a piece of it. Every once in a while, you'll hear a news story about people being found in a shipping crate. They're often dead because they were neglected. There was a big high-profile one in Britain recently. And you'll see that every once in a while, and that is trafficking. That's what it is. Especially with the increase in immigration recently all around the world, we've been hearing about people like coyotes who are exploiting people to get them across borders secretly. Things like this. I mean, that's a version of trafficking. And so a lot of times it is...
Define coyote real quick, because all I can think of is the animal.
Yeah.
Or the Phoenix Coyotes.
Not a hockey team.
Basically, it's a person who... tells people who are trying to get into another country that I can get you there, past the authorities. I can get you over the border if you pay me usually an exorbitant amount of money. And then to what John was saying earlier, one of the common manipulations and power dynamics that goes into that later is that they'll say, we'll get you a passport once you're over there, or we'll hold on to your papers to get you over safely, or whatever lie they tell them. And then once they're in their destination, they say, well, now you owe us $100,000 for all the work and the risk that we took getting you here. So you're going to work for us, and we're not going to release your identifying papers until you do what we tell you to. And of course, then it's just a vicious cycle where you don't know the language of the country, you don't have any kind of paperwork to get yourself set up. You're essentially at the mercy of these people, and they exploit it to make money off of you.
That's really sinister, and this is happening all over the world. Because I think naturally, if we're living in America, we think the U.S.-Mexico border, and we're thinking people fleeing countries that where the conditions are not advantageous to continue living or thriving, and they come to America because it's land of prosperity and all that. But this is happening all over the place, and what I'm hearing is that these folks who are trying to travel and emigrate, they end up trusting the wrong people, who then get them into a loop of abuse.
Mm-hmm. It's not even so much trusting the wrong people; it's that you didn't have much of a choice otherwise. Okay. And so and that's again like what John was saying. That's the manipulation and the power differences that come into play here, is that you're in a desperate situation, someone comes and says they can help you out where otherwise you might not see a way out, and then from there they kind of have you by the short hairs, and there's not much you can do, and you feel trapped, and then a lot of people just feel like, well, this is my life now and I don't have a choice, and I'm stuck in this cycle, and I don't know how to get help. I don't know who to go to help. A lot of times they're told, well, you're a criminal in this country, so you'll be arrested if you go to the police. All these kind of things, right? Mm-hmm. They control all of their communication. They control all of their resources. And this is where the idea of slavery comes into play here, is they're controlling every aspect of their life. And it's not for their good, right? It's to exploit them, whether they're forcing them to have sex with whoever they tell them to, whether they're forcing them to work. And it's not like they're making an income off of this, right? They're being exploited, and so all the money is going to those who control them. So it's essentially a hopeless situation these people find themselves in, or at least that's how it feels. And that's a big part of why the anti-trafficking fight is all about getting the word out to those who are being exploited that there is help out there, that they're not going to be just thrown in jail if they reach out to someone. They're not going to be deported back to the country where gang violence was threatening their family if they speak out. That there are options, and that they're not alone out there, because that's what the traffickers try to make you feel is you're alone, you're at our mercy, and you're going to do what we tell you or else.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like the domestic violence cycle.
Yeah,
Really.
exactly.
Very much.
And then just to add on from the law enforcement about reporting it, we look at, for example, just sexual assault alone. Less than 1% of our victims report their sexual assault to law enforcement.
Less than 1%?
1%. Yep.
What are the reasons for that?
I think a lot of it's trust. A lot of it's the believing, and the part that they don't have the unfortunately the mindset that someone else will believe their story, right? Where they've gone and then they get stuck in this cycle and they get pushed around from different resources, and other nonprofits can't help them out, and then they just lose trust with trying to find help. And we see that a lot with human trafficking. Almost 1 in 7, I believe, youth runaways that end up being trafficked are in custody of social services. So that's a really hard stat to even think, even when they're getting help. It's just that we're not doing enough, right? We think we are. We have a great mindset. We all of us want to help, but they actually, when it comes to actually doing it, to put in to work, we're not doing a very good job.
So what does the common citizen do other than donate to Safe Embrace, donate to Awaken, donate to Compassion First? What do we do to help pass this message along, raise awareness, notice it in our own communities? What does it practically look like? I'm not wandering the farms outside of Fernley or Lovelock or Winnemucca. What does it look like in the middle of Reno or New York City or Perth? What is it? How do we know? What do we do?
I think for sure is, trusting your gut instinct. If something's not right, it's not right, right? You look at, for example, nightclubs, right? The one guy you can look at, for example, to someone that's going around talking to people and then, trying to take advantage of drinks, right? That's common with date rape, but that also is, very common with human trafficking.
Oh, interesting.
As well,
okay.
Right.
Huh.
And then, there's a great danger assessment that the Attorney General's Office of Nevada has for law enforcement, and questions to ask when they come across victims when it comes to human trafficking. So if you, for example, looking and asking about the whole passport, right? Does someone guarantee you papers when you're to come over the border if you're working with things like that? A lot of it is in an ER setting. That's huge, especially with medical. Over 88% of healthcare providers will come across a victim of human trafficking.
Right, because they're not well cared for and they end up in the hospital.
Yeah, exactly. And I kind of break it down into a sports analogy, right? If your best player is not out there, you're going to try to get them to your trainer and get them healed as quick as possible so they get back on the field, right? You don't want your C team out there trying to make plays, right? So they're going to get help, right? Mm-hmm. So, for example, in an ER setting, if they can't be left alone at any time, that's a red flag, not only for domestic violence, but also human trafficking as well. Right?
And you mean the patient who comes in, whoever brings them in won't leave them there, is
yes.
what you're saying?
Yes, correct.
So there's some person shadowing them,
right?
Like almost like a chaperone.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Or answering their questions for them. Mm-hmm. Stories don't line up right. Unusual reactions to, for example, gynecology exams, things like that. Especially with children, too, kind of already like sexual grooming. Is also very prevalent for not even that to be a red flag for child abuse, but also human trafficking.
Gotcha. Ronnie, you guys just recently presented, and I didn't know this until right before we started recording. I actually didn't know how closely you two had been working. I know you both from different capacities, and we just one day I was like, "Hey, John, talk to this guy Ron Toft," and Ronnie, "Hey, John's going to reach out." But since then, you've done several presentations and whatnot. Share some of those, but specifically this one that seems really surprising.
Yeah, so the one we recently just did was consulting would be probably the best way to put it. Almost a consulting kind of seminar for a delegation from South Korea on how to address human trafficking victims, refugees from North Korea. It was we hit it out of the park. It was over, I think, a 2-hour presentation, and over an hour of that was Q&A for just us. And the biggest question, I mean, not only the work that we do, especially because I think how we laid it out from an international standpoint and from a from a domestic standpoint, I think it was a home run. But they were shocked that majority of the questions just because it's two guys doing the presentation.
Yeah. Tell me how this came to be.
Well, it was actually in collaboration with the university in town. They have like a program where they bring professionals from other countries into the area for different reasons. And I don't know how exactly this group came here to Reno, but they were interested while they were here and talking with people in the area about the issue of trafficking, as John said, and specifically how to deal with some of the issues in their country. And that was great because they, like a lot of other countries, this is still a very new issue. Not that it's happening that it's new, but that the awareness is new, that people are fighting against it is new. And so resources are rare, knowledge is rare, education is rare. And so they were just happy to ask questions, like John said, for a long time, and just kind of glean from our experience and our knowledge in this. America is actually really on the forefront of this issue. The American government specifically has really taken this on over the last decade. Their Trafficking in Persons report that comes out every year generates, or rather is the result of research from basically every country on earth, and they get a score of how they're doing in trafficking in persons. We've really done a pretty good job of getting the laws in line in order to be taking care of this problem from a law enforcement and a judicial point of view. There's definitely still some work to be done, but America's been doing a great job actually of getting on the forefront of this issue. So I think there's a lot that people from other countries can learn from that and kind of use that example.
What are some highlights of the presentation that you gave? And then if you could maybe remember some of the questions that stood out that may be useful for our audience, share those if you would, please.
I wanted to highlight something that John said, that they were really surprised. It was all women, mostly all women, that are doing this work in South Korea from this delegation, and they were really surprised to see two men involved in it. And I've, as a man myself, working overseas with this issue, that's very common. That people are surprised that men are getting involved in the issue, and I think that's a big deal because, in my opinion, men should be more involved in this.
Why aren't they?
I think especially in other countries, it doesn't seem as masculine or macho of a thing. You're dealing mostly with women and children. Although actually recent studies have shown there's a lot more men being trafficked than we previously thought or that you might imagine. But it just doesn't seem, like a very masculine thing to be helping these women and children in a lot of cultures, which is unfortunate because I think that it's absolutely something that should be doing.
Yeah, it seems like the most manly thing you can do is protect other human beings,
totally
right? If we're actually talking about authentic masculinity, not this weird toxic masculinity everybody's
and not only that, but
about.
The vast majority of the people committing this crime, be they the Johns buying the people or the traffickers doing it, are men. So why are we allowing men to be the criminals and women to be the ones
and why are we allowing
law?
those men to represent what manhood looks like?
Exactly.
Like, shouldn't we step up and show what real masculinity looks like, which is the advocacy and the protection?
Yeah, I agree. So I think the more men that allow this to be a part of what defines them as a man, the better this is going to be. And I think we as men can add a new aspect to this fight and kind of flex our muscles, so to speak, to protect those who can't protect themselves. And if that's not something that makes you feel like a man, I don't know what does.
And then to add on, kind of, I guess, one question that I think was asked for you that when we talked about the whole masculinity thing was how you have, I think it was security guards for stuff. I think that was kind of, we look at, for example, we talk about masculinity, right? And I think that providing security, right, kind of gives that illusion that that's a masculine trait to have, right? Being the protector.
Right. And
then you're protecting women and children. And I think 3 out of 3 guys in the room here say that's a huge masculine trait to have is to protect. You always hear that, right? Protect women and children, right? Yeah. And when it comes to victims of human trafficking, there are women and then there are children, right? And protectors that's a very common thing that makes a masculine trait and holding people accountable for their actions. So it's starting to pick up. I think, especially in the past, even with the Noggin Notes podcast, with, having John Kane on, who's an expert in this, and then having us, and then there's other government officials that are, working hard to combat this. And then also with law enforcement, I think Nevada is one of the more transparent areas in, really the country for law enforcement, especially when you go and train recruits on the, for mental health and things like that. And, they're starting to look